disturbed too.
I know. But I really had to say something about the climate because there's so much resistance to parlaying this in context. It has become so much of an agenda. And the tragedy is people are emotionally hoodwinked. They're spiritually hoodwinked to believe that we have, quote, a climate problem and that it's not cyclical. It's stunning the level of the deception that's occurring. And God forbid if anybody says anything to the contrary at every level at which the deception has occurred. I'm not even talking about what happened at the East Anglia. That's like its own thing. I'm talking just the specific things that are left out of explaining this whole thing in context. God help you. You're called crazy. You're called a denier. You're basically written off. And the whole thing has been deflected. So very brilliant.
To get people into a fervor and then so that they're not thinking. But let me say something that you may not know or have.
There's a lot I don't know.
Maybe.
There's a lot I don't know.
But the weather records, for example, here in California, but prior to the time of computers, which computers are relatively new, all the historical data that was written down in California was actually written down by hand. And you go to your fire department, you go to different agencies, and what they were doing is they were writing down temperature, rainfall data. They took the temperatures, they took the rainfall data, they took the highs and the lows every single day. And there are millions of handwritten records, I've seen them, all over, that have never been computerized because it would take too long to do it. So throughout California, even into the 1980s and sometimes into the early 1990s, the data in all these local communities all through the state of California was all handwritten. There's been nobody that has gone into all these handwritten data to put them into some computer to look at the modeling from these older histories. So therefore, when they talk about their climate models maybe only going back, in other words, into the 1980s somewhere, it means that their data and their models are incorrect because they haven't gone back and actually put the data in for temperatures.
They have also ignored the surface stations all over the country that have not been updated, that are planted near cement and areas where there's tons of cement. There's a very interesting portal called surfacestations.org that talk about a huge project that reaches 82% of the network surveyed. 1,003 of 1,221 stations have been examined, and they have the full report. It's called Is the U.S. Surface Temperature Record Reliable by Anthony Watts. It's a blockbuster project. Mm-hmm. That's just a little piece of what's being left out. The other thing that's being left out is our projects having to do with microwave stations and how microwave stations are used to transmit microwave radiation. And also, the HAARP project is real. That project is in Alaska and in other parts of the world. You can't tell me that microwave stations have no impact on our upper atmosphere. They're blowing holes into the ionosphere. Nothing of that sort is taken into account with the IPCC analysis of climate. Between what's going on in the ocean, the HAARP projects in the atmosphere, and other projects in the atmosphere, the genetic modifying of food, none of that is taken into account to look at what's happening. And yet, what's so interesting is that our sun has not been taken into account for any impacts on climate by the IPCC, the supposed global body that's looking at this. How can you not take into account the sun? For example, we're in a solar minimum where there's minimum activity with sunspots, and that usually correlates throughout human history with cooling, little ice ages, etc. The fact is that our Earth is cooling. And the minute that the public gets what is happening, people are going to be in shock. Absolute, total shock.
Well, and also with the weather modification that's going on across the United States from various companies and the military, etc., the short-term weather is being changed because they're doing these particular experiments. And there's 66 in the western states that we know about ongoing every year where various companies in the military and agencies and cities and counties and states and whole groups of people, private individuals, because anyone can modify your weather without your consent at this point, because there's no laws to prohibit, and there's no laws that say that the public has to be notified. So when people see weather events and they say, oh, these are stunning and it must be climate change, it's not climate change. It has to do with these experimental weather modification programs that are ongoing in real time.
After I did 200 hours of investigation, it was clear. Actually, it was clear in the first 50 hours that something terrible is being pulled over the American public and the global public.
Well, they have to, have you read the UK Parliament position on global geoengineering governance?
No.
Well, they came out in March. They're working with the U.S. House of Representatives Science and Technology Committee under Congressman Bart Gordon. Now, the U.S. House Science and Technology Committee is going to release their first global geoengineering report any day because it's at the printing press, U.S. Congressional Printing Press. They're going to release a further report in mid-September, a larger report. But they're working with the UK Parliament, who has made a decision to fund global geoengineering projects, including the great one, solar radiation management. Now, what you have to know is that this is a global program that will have, in other words, allow different companies, allow anyone to put up chemicals and particles in the atmosphere like sulfur to and other experiments to reduce the amount of sunlight reaching the Earth.
Why?
Because they say that will reduce global warming.
You know that is not true.
That's not true. Okay, so we already know that that's not true. But however, because they're going to be conducting a whole lot of other experiments. However, and here's the key. The scientists that are promoting this know that sulfur and other particulates coming down to Earth will cause acid rains, will cause water pollution, air pollution, all kinds of possible other problems that they don't even know about, but they still want to do these experiments, and not one experiment at a time, even multiple experiments. So it's coming down the pike like a railroad, a Mack truck going downhill that has no brakes. I mean, this is how fast it's going to roll through with legislation here. Now, it's very interesting that in the Parliament report, which is online, and I'm going to put it up on my website today because I just am going to do that later today. But in reading the report, one has to understand that if you reduce the amount of sunlight reaching the Earth, solar power is out as a source of power production. Every plant, everything in our whole system on Earth, the oceans, the land, the soils, the plants, the trees, all require photosynthesis. Without photosynthesis, you're going to have a drop in crop production. You're going to have, your trees won't be healthy, your plants won't be healthy. Then you're going to, from this lack of sunlight. And also, we're already seeing severe vitamin D deficiencies across the United States and related health effects. Well, if we put this solar radiation management plan into effect, there isn't going to be alternative forms of energy like solar because your panels are going to drop in production. We're already doing that with the man-made clouds produced by the jets. We're already reducing the amount of sunlight. We're already reducing the amount of solar power output when this haze and clouds are up. Now they're talking about doing this on a global basis. The impact on human health, animal health, weathers, when you stop the sun from, in other words, direct sunlight, and you start changing how much reaches the Earth, you're going to impact weather, climate, you're going to impact everything.
Health,
the whole thing. So I have put up on my website under sunlight all the health effects from lack of vitamin D, and there's a lot of them. There's links to breast cancer, mental problems. There's links to birth defects